Case 1. Christopher Watts. On August 15, 2018, inside an interrogation room in Denver, Colorado, a polygraph examiner sat across from a quiet, 33-year-old oil operator. The machine recorded a score of -18, an indication of profound deception. Within hours, law enforcement drone footage of a remote oil field captured a single, pastel bedsheet lying in a barren field of dirt. That single piece of fabric broke open an investigation that shocked a nation. Before the week concluded, Christopher Lee Watts stood in a Weld County courtroom facing 9 felony counts, including multiple charges of first-degree murder. To avoid the death penalty, he accepted a plea agreement resulting in 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life inside a maximum security prison. To understand how he got here, we have to go back. Born in May 1985 in North Carolina, Chris Watts grew up quietly. Acquaintances and family described him as soft-spoken, agreeable and passive. He avoided confrontation, excelled at mechanical work, and rarely expressed strong emotions or conflict. In 2010, he met Shannon Arzusek. They married 2 years later in Charlotte before relocating to Frederick, Colorado, to build a life in a growing suburban community. To the outside world, Chris appeared to be a devoted husband and father. He maintained steady employment as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum, earning a reputation among coworkers as a reliable, quiet worker who followed orders without complaint. Shannon built a prominent public presence through social media, documenting their home life, their 2 young daughters, and her work with a health and wellness marketing company. Yet beneath that pleasant exterior lay a personality defined by deep emotional detachment and extreme passivity. Chris was a man who hid his internal desires behind a mask of compliance. Rather than addressing conflict directly, he suppressed dissatisfaction until he felt completely detached from the life he had built. When pressures mounted, his quiet compliance transformed into cold calculation. Small cracks began showing in 2015 when the couple filed for joint bankruptcy. By mid-2018, financial strains lingered, but a deeper rift emerged during a 6-week summer trip Shannon took to North Carolina with their daughters. Left alone in Colorado, Chris began an extramarital affair with an Anadarko co-worker, Nicole Kessinger. He began spending heavily, searching for local apartments and mentally checking out of his marriage. The escalation was gradual but absolute. Texts sent by Shannon to close friends during July 2018 documented a husband who had suddenly turned cold, distant, and emotionally inaccessible. Chris was actively building a secret double life, convincing himself that his family stood between him and the fresh start he desired. On the morning of August 13, 2018, Shannon arrived home at 1:48 a.m. after a delayed business trip to Arizona, dropped off by her friend Nicole Atkinson. Hours later, at 5:00 a.m., a final confrontation occurred in the master bedroom regarding their marriage and his demand for separation. Chris asphyxiated Shannon, loaded her body into the cab of his work truck, and drove his 2 living daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, out to an isolated Anadarko site known as Survey 319. At the job site, he ended the lives of both children and concealed their remains inside separate oil tankers through 8-inch hatches, burying Shannon in a shallow grave nearby. The investigation unfolded at an unprecedented pace. By 12:10 p.m. that same afternoon, Nicole Atkinson alerted local police when Shannon missed a critical appointment. Officer Scott Coonrod conducted a welfare check alongside Chris. Bodycam footage captured key irregularities immediately. Shannon's purse, keys, phone, and medication were left inside, while the master bed was stripped of its sheets. A neighbor's security camera provided the turning point, capturing footage from 5:27 a.m. that showed Chris backing his work truck up to the garage, a routine he had never performed before, and loading items into the back. During a formal polygraph examination administered by CBI agent Tammy Lee on August 15, Chris failed the test completely. Interrogators pressed him on the discrepancies between his statements, the surveillance footage, and cell site data. Chris initially offered a partial truth, claiming he lashed out after seeing Shannon harm their children on a monitor. Investigators recognized the lie, maintained pressure, and formally arrested him that evening. Drone footage over Survey 319 spotted the discarded bedsheet matching the master bedroom linens, allowing search teams to recover all the victims on August 16. On November 6, 2018, prosecutors announced that Chris had agreed to plead guilty to all charges to avoid the death penalty, a decision supported by Shannon's family. On November 19, Judge Richard Blair handed down 5 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus an additional 84 years for remaining charges. Due to security concerns surrounding his profile, corrections officials transferred Chris in December 2018 to Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. In 2019 prison interviews, law enforcement officers documented his full, final admission of the crimes. The case of Christopher Watts remains a chilling study in the danger of absolute suppression. It demonstrates how a persona built entirely on quiet compliance, when combined with cowardice and narcissism, can lead an individual to destroy everything he built rather than confront the reality of his own choices. Case 2. Christian Longo. On January 14, 2002, federal agents and Mexican police surrounded a small hostel in Cholum, Mexico. They took into custody a man who was living under the stolen identity of a prominent investigative reporter, spending his days partying in coastal resort towns. Back in Oregon, 2 submerged suitcases had just been pulled from the freezing waters of Yaquina Bay, revealing a horror that spanned across multiple states. Within 15 months of his capture, a jury in Lincoln County, Oregon, found the 29-year-old guilty on all counts of aggravated murder. The judge handed down a sentence of death by lethal injection, capping one of the most intense international manhunts in recent Pacific Northwest history. To understand how he got here, we have to go back. Born in January 1974, Christian Longo grew up in Iowa within a strict Jehovah's Witness household. To those around him, he appeared energetic, charismatic, and ambitious. He married Mary Jane Baker in 1993, and together they started a family in Michigan, eventually having 3 children, Zachary, Sadie, and Madison. Outside observers saw an attractive, devoted family man striving for success. Yet behind that polished facade lived a compulsive liar and serial financial fraudster. Longo was driven by an unquenchable desire for a luxurious lifestyle he could not afford. Rather than building genuine success through hard work, he relied on forgery, stolen construction equipment, fake identities, and counterfeit checks to maintain an illusion of wealth. His personality was defined by intense narcissism and a total refusal to accept public failure. When reality caught up with his lies, Longo felt no guilt or accountability. Instead, he simply created a new identity and walked away from the wreckage. People in his life were not individuals to love, but props to serve his grand self-image. When those props became financial obligations that threatened to expose him, he viewed them as disposable. The escalation began in 2000 when Michigan courts convicted Longo of check fraud, placing him on probation. Facing mounting debts, eviction notices, and looming prison time, he stole a Dodge Durango, gathered his family, and fled Michigan in mid-2001. Using stolen checks and fake names, he moved his family to Newport, Oregon, renting an expensive apartment at the Embarcadero Resort while taking a low-wage job at a local Starbucks. As the financial net tightened once again, Longo decided that his family was the primary obstacle keeping him from total freedom. In mid-December 2001, inside their apartment, Longo carried out a calculated plan. While his 4-year-old son Zachary and 3-year-old daughter Sadie slept, he strangled them both, attached rock-filled pillowcases to their ankles, and dropped their bodies into Lint Slough near Walport. Returning to the apartment, he strangled his 27-year-old wife Mary Jane and 2-year-old daughter Madison, stuffed their remains into 2 large suitcases, and submerged them in Yaquina Bay. The forensic investigation unfolded rapidly. On December 19, a passerby spotted Zachary floating in Lint Slough, and police divers recovered Sadie 3 days later. On December 27, divers located the 2 suitcases containing Mary Jane and Madison. Crime scene investigators matched the unique linen patterns on the rock-filled pillowcases directly to bedsheets left in the abandoned Longo apartment. Credit card trails showed Longo using stolen credentials to book flights after abandoning his stolen Durango at San Francisco International Airport. On December 28, 2001, the FBI placed Longo on its 10 most wanted fugitives list. By then, he had already reached Cancun, Mexico, assuming the identity of real-life New York Times journalist Michael Finkel. Longo integrated into the local expat community until a tourist recognized his face from FBI wanted posters. Mexican authorities arrested him in Cholum on January 14, 2002, and extradited him back to Oregon. During his 2003 trial, Longo took the stand in a bizarre attempt to blame his deceased wife, claiming he only killed Mary Jane and Madison in a rage after finding that she had harmed the older children. Prosecutors dismantled his story using precise cell tower data, witness timelines, and forensic evidence proving a single individual committed all 4 murders in a sequential pattern. On April 23, 2003, the court sentenced Christian Longo to death. In December 2022, Oregon Governor Kate Brown commuted all state death row sentences to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. While in prison awaiting trial, Longo had contacted the real Michael Finkel, leading to extensive interviews that formed the basis of Finkel's memoir True Story, later adapted into a 2015 feature film starring James Franco and Jonah Hill. The case of Christian Longo exposes the ultimate danger of severe narcissism merged with chronic deceit. It demonstrates how a person consumed by vanity and an obsession with image can come to view their own family as mere leverage, and ultimately eliminate them the moment they threaten to shatter a fragile illusion of success. Case 3. Ronald Gene Simmons. On December 28, 1987, inside an oil service business in Russellville, Arkansas, a soft-spoken 57-year-old retired military officer calmly handed a .32 caliber revolver to police officers. As he surrendered, he uttered a chilling sentence to the arresting deputies. He had gotten everyone who had ever hurt him. Hours later, law enforcement officers drove up a remote gravel road to his secluded homestead on Mockingbird Hill, uncovering a scene of absolute devastation that shattered a rural community. Within 15 months, Arkansas courts handed down 16 individual sentences of death by lethal injection. The perpetrator refused every attempt to delay his punishment, insisting that the legal system execute him without delay. To understand how he got here, we have to go back. Born in July 1940 in Massachusetts, Ronald Gene Simmons spent 21 years serving in the United States military, eventually retiring as a master sergeant from the Air Force in 1979. Colleagues and neighbors viewed him as a rigid, cold disciplinarian who kept to himself. Beneath that quiet militaristic demeanor lived a deeply authoritarian and abusive figure who exercised total control over his household. Simmons possessed a personality marked by extreme antisocial traits, paranoia, and an insatiable demand for absolute power. He viewed his family not as individuals, but as personal property subject entirely to his authority. When any family member attempted to assert independence or expose his dark secrets, his possessive mindset transformed into calculated hostility. The initial escalation began in the early 1980s while the family resided in New Mexico. State law enforcement, opened a criminal investigation after his eldest daughter, Sheila, disclosed to authorities that Simmons had subjected her to years of severe abuse and had fathered a child with her. To evade law enforcement and criminal prosecution, Simmons abruptly packed up his household and fled into the Ozark Mountains, purchasing a secluded, fenced property off Mockingbird Hill near Dover, Arkansas, where he could isolate his family from the outside world. Over the next several years, isolation fed his growing resentment toward his family and former co-workers whom he believed had wronged him. Between December 22 and December 26, 1987, Simmons carried out a systematic plan. He began on the morning of December 22 by taking the life of his 46-year-old wife Rebecca, shooting his 29-year-old son Gene, and taking the life of his 3-year-old granddaughter Barbara, placing their remains in a hand-dug pit on the property. Over the next 48 hours, he ambushed his remaining school-aged children one by one as they arrived home. On December 26, when his adult children arrived with their spouses and infants for a planned Christmas gathering, he ended their lives as well, bringing the total count on the homestead to 14. On the morning of December 28, Simmons drove into nearby Russellville to address personal grudges. He walked into a local real estate office and took the life of 24-year-old receptionist Kathy Kendrick, who had previously rejected his romantic advances, while wounding an executive. He then drove to an oil company office, taking the life of 26-year-old Jim Chablis and injuring another employee. After shooting 2 more individuals at a local store, he walked into an oil service business, dropped his revolver onto a desk, and waited for law enforcement to arrive. Deputies dispatched to the homestead discovered 14 bodies spread across the property. 7 were wrapped in plastic sheets and stacked inside an outbuilding, while others lay inside the house covered by coats and tablecloths. Forensic ballistics quickly matched the surrendered revolver to the projectiles recovered from both the town spree locations and the rural property. Throughout his trial, Simmons displayed complete indifference to his legal fate. He was charged with 16 counts of capital murder, tried first for the 2 town shootings and subsequently for the 14 homestead homicides. He received 16 separate death sentences. Simmons repeatedly demanded that no appeals be filed on his behalf, taking his legal battle all the way to the Arkansas Supreme Court to block outside anti-death penalty advocacy groups from intervening. On June 25, 1990, less than 2.5 years after his arrest, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton signed the execution warrant, and authorities executed Simmons by lethal injection at the Cummins Unit Prison. His execution marked the fastest post-reinstatement capital punishment process in modern Arkansas history. No family members stepped forward to claim his remains, and he was buried in a pauper's field. The case of Ronald Gene Simmons remains a devastating portrait of tyrannical domestic abuse and unchecked grievance. It demonstrates how a possessive, controlling individual, driven by a fear of exposure and a desire for absolute dominance, can escalate from severe domestic tyranny into a catastrophic act of violence. Case 4, Jeffrey MacDonald. On August 29, 1979, inside a federal courtroom in Raleigh, North Carolina, a jury returned a guilty verdict against a 35-year-old former military surgeon. The conviction marked the end of a 9-year legal battle surrounding an emergency call made from a quiet housing complex inside the Fort Bragg Army installation. The presiding judge handed down 3 consecutive life sentences, closing one of the most heavily litigated military and civilian murder investigations in American legal history. To understand how he got here, we have to go back. Born in December 1943 in Queens, New York, Jeffrey MacDonald was an extraordinary overachiever. Bright, athletic, and highly articulate, he graduated from Princeton University before earning his medical degree from Northwestern University Medical School. In 1963, he married his high school sweetheart, Colette Stevenson. By 1969, he had joined the United States Army as a captain and physician, securing a position in the elite 3rd Special Forces Group, the Green Berets. By early 1970, the couple lived on base at 544 Castle Drive with their daughters, Kimberly and Kristen, while Colette was 3 months pregnant. To colleagues and neighbors, MacDonald embodied success, discipline, and professional promise. Yet behind his charismatic, highly polished exterior lay a man driven by deep narcissism and an extraordinary commitment to maintaining an unblemished public image. MacDonald relied heavily on approval and prestige to validate his self-worth. When domestic pressures mounted or internal conflicts threatened to breach his controlled life, he possessed a distinct capacity for cold detachment. The subtle escalation began beneath the surface of their domestic life. Friends noted that behind the ideal suburban image, financial responsibilities, career demands, and the strain of raising a young family were creating silent tension inside the home. For a man accustomed to seamless accomplishment and personal freedom, the claustrophobia of domestic pressure began to collide with his fragile ego. At 3:42 a.m. on February 17, 1970, military police responded to a frantic phone call from MacDonald reporting an ongoing stabbing inside his residence. When officers entered the home, they uncovered a violent scene. 26-year-old Colette lay dead on the master bedroom floor, having suffered blunt force trauma and multiple sharp force injuries, with a word written across her chest in blood. 5-year-old Kimberly and 2-year-old Kristen lay dead in their respective beds, each having suffered severe traumatic injuries. MacDonald was found conscious beside his wife, wearing a torn blue pajama top. He suffered superficial cuts, minor abrasions, and a minor chest puncture that caused a partial lung collapse. He claimed that while sleeping on the living room sofa, he was woken by screams and confronted by 4 intruders, 3 men and a woman holding a candle, who allegedly attacked him before he lost consciousness. The Army Criminal Investigation Division secured the premises, but initial investigators quickly noticed critical physical discrepancies. Despite heavy rainfall that night, search teams found no wet tracks, muddy footprints, or unidentified fingerprints inside the house or near entry points. Forensic analysis revealed that the weapons used, a wooden club, a paring knife, and an ice pick, all originated from within the MacDonald household. The physical evidence pointed back to the sofa. Microscopic fiber analysis showed that blue threads from MacDonald's torn pajama top were present underneath Colette's body and trapped beneath the fingernails of the children. Crucially, investigators recovered no blue fibers in the living room where MacDonald claimed his garment was ripped during a violent struggle with intruders. Furthermore, blood pattern analysis showed that blood matching all 3 victims was spread sequentially through the master bedroom and children's rooms, whereas MacDonald's blood was recovered only in minimal amounts in the kitchen and bathroom mirror area. In late 1970, an initial military Article 32 hearing recommended dropping the charges due to crime scene handling errors by early responders, allowing MacDonald to receive an honorable discharge and move to California to practice medicine. However, Colette's stepfather, Alfred Kassab, examined the physical evidence and became convinced of MacDonald's involvement. Kassab launched a relentless campaign targeting the Department of Justice to reopen the case. A civilian grand jury re-indicted MacDonald in 1975, leading to his 1979 federal trial. Prosecutors presented comprehensive forensic reconstructions, proving that an argument escalated into violence, followed by a deliberate staging of the scene to mimic famous high-profile cult crimes of that era. Following his conviction, MacDonald appealed repeatedly, citing alternate suspect theories and modern DNA testing requests. Author Joe McGinnis embedded with the defense team to write Fatal Vision, ultimately concluding that the evidence demonstrated guilt. Federal appeals courts in 2012 and 2021 consistently upheld the original convictions based on the overwhelming weight of physical evidence. The case of Jeffrey MacDonald remains a powerful study in the danger of a hyper-controlled ego. It illustrates how an individual consumed by image and self-preservation, when faced with an unexpected rupture in their controlled world, can choose total destruction over accountability. Case 5. George Banks. On September 25, 1982, in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, armored police vehicles surrounded a modest home on Indiana Avenue. Inside, a 40-year-old former state prison guard barricaded himself behind closed doors following a multi-location shooting spree that claimed 13 lives in less than an hour. 4 hours later, negotiators convinced the gunman to step onto the porch and surrender. Within 9 months, a Luzerne County jury convicted him of 13 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death. However, decades of legal battles over his mental capacity ultimately led the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to stay his execution indefinitely, ensuring he would spend his remaining days confined to a state correctional facility. To understand how he got here, we have to go back. Born in June 1942 in Wilkes-Barre, George Emil Banks grew up as the son of a black father and a white mother. From a young age, he struggled with intense feelings of social isolation and racial alienation. In 1961, at age 19, his volatile temperament surfaced when he participated in an armed robbery of a local tavern, during which he shot and wounded a police officer. That crime resulted in a prison sentence. Following his release, Banks appeared to rebuild his life, securing employment in 1980 as a guard at the Camp Hill State Correctional Institution. Yet beneath his uniform lived a deeply unstable individual consumed by severe persecutory delusions, jealousy, and extreme possessiveness. He harbored intense paranoia regarding race, convincing himself that society was inherently hostile and that his mixed-race children were condemned to suffer an unbearable existence. His personality deteriorated into extreme volatility. As his mental health declined, Banks turned to alcohol and prescription medications, which amplified his paranoia. He viewed his domestic partners and children through a lens of total ownership, believing that destroying them was preferable to allowing them to exist in a world he perceived as oppressive. The gradual escalation accelerated across 1981 and 1982. Colleagues noted his erratic behavior, while domestic partners experienced increasing coercion and threats. Driven by mounting financial troubles, relationship conflicts, and deepening psychotic delusions, Banks concluded that a final confrontation was inevitable. During the early morning hours of September 25, 1982, Banks put on his prison guard uniform, armed himself with a semi-automatic AR-15 rifle, and began a systematic assault across multiple locations. At his residence on Schoolhouse Lane, he shot his live-in girlfriend Regina Burns and their 2 daughters, Montania and Kisme. Moving into an adjacent room, he shot his girlfriend Susan Yuhas and their 3 children, Boomer, Foretta, and Bodie. He then walked next door, shooting visitors Raymond Ferguson and James Kelly. Driving to Hepburn Street, Banks forced his way into another home, taking the life of former girlfriend Dorothy McNulty, their daughter Morita, and 10-year-old visitor Nancy Leon. Fleeing to a nearby public park, he fired into a parked vehicle, killing Scott Stroll and critically wounding another occupant. In under an hour, Banks had shot 14 people, leaving 13 dead, 8 of whom were children. Law enforcement cordoned off the city as emergency calls flooded the dispatch center. Police tracked Banks to his mother's residence on Indiana Avenue, establishing a perimeter. Specialized SWAT negotiators worked continuously to maintain communications while teams secured the surrounding blocks. Realizing he was completely surrounded and out of ammunition, Banks surrendered peacefully at 11:15 a.m. During his June 1983 trial in Luzerne County, defense attorneys argued that Banks was legally insane at the time of the shootings, suffering from severe paranoid schizophrenia. prosecutors presented evidence of premeditation, highlighting his tactical movement between locations, his decision to wear his guard uniform, and his deliberate reload cycles. On June 22, 1983, the jury returned guilty verdicts on 13 counts of first-degree murder and subsequently imposed the death penalty. Over the next 23 years, Banks remained on death row while his defense team pursued appeals focused on his mental fitness. In 2006, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ordered a comprehensive psychological evaluation. Medical experts concluded that Banks suffered from advanced psychosis, delusions, and severe cognitive decline, rendering him legally incompetent for execution under constitutional standards. In May 2010, state courts stayed his execution warrant indefinitely, transferring his custody to the State Correctional Institution, Phoenix. The case of George Banks remains one of the most tragic examples of unaddressed mental illness paired with accessible firepower. It demonstrates how severe paranoid delusions, reinforced by substance abuse and possessiveness, can shatter a community and turn a guardian of law into an agent of destruction. Case 6. Robert William Fisher. On April 20, 2001, deep inside a pine forest near Payson, Arizona, law enforcement search teams located an abandoned Toyota 4Runner parked near a network of remote caves. Nearby, officers found a blue heeler dog wandering lost, a cap, and personal items scattered near a natural shelter. 10 days earlier, a suburban home in Scottsdale had erupted in a violent natural gas explosion, revealing a crime scene that ignited one of the longest manhunts in American history. The owner of that vehicle, 40-year-old Robert William Fisher, vanished completely. The FBI placed him on its 10 most wanted fugitives list, launching an international search that spanned 2 decades. To understand how he got here, we have to go back. Born in April 1961 in Brooklyn, New York, Robert Fisher experienced a turbulent youth deeply affected by his parents' bitter divorce when he was 15 years old. Acquaintances noted that the experience left him with a lasting resentment and an obsession with maintaining absolute authority over his own home. He served in the United States Navy as a surgical technician before moving to Arizona, where he married Mary Cooper in 1987. The couple had 2 children, Brittany and Bobby Jr. To neighbors and fellow churchgoers, Fisher presented himself as an outdoorsman, skilled hunter, and devoted family man who earned a respectable living as a surgical catheter technician in Phoenix. Yet inside his household, he maintained an abusive, highly volatile environment. He imposed strict rules, demanded complete compliance from his children, and regularly humiliated his wife, threatening suicide whenever she brought up marital counseling or separation. Fisher's personality was defined by rigid perfectionism, fragile pride, and a compulsive need for total dominance. He viewed his family through an owner's mindset rather than a partner's. To Fisher, a failed marriage represented unbearable public shame. Rather than face the loss of authority or suffer the public humiliation of divorce, his twisted logic dictated total destruction. The final escalation unfolded across early 2001. Exhausted by years of emotional abuse, Mary Fisher informed close friends that she was taking steps to file for divorce. For Fisher, the prospect of an impending split triggered severe anger. Rather than accept an end to the marriage, he began preparing a plan to eliminate his family and erase the physical evidence. On the night of April 9, 2001, Fisher initiated his plan. At 10:22 p.m., security camera footage captured him withdrawing $280 from a local ATM using Mary's card. Returning to the residence, he took the life of 38-year-old Mary, then moved into the bedrooms of 12-year-old Brittany and 10-year-old Bobby Jr., taking their lives while they lay in bed. To destroy the crime scene and delay discovery, Fisher detached a natural gas line behind the home's furnace, allowing gas to fill the structure. He placed a lit candle in a separate room to serve as an ignition fuse, giving himself hours to escape. At 8:47 a.m. on April 10, the accumulated gas ignited, causing a massive explosion that destroyed the house. Firefighters responding to the blaze recovered the bodies from the rubble. Autopsies quickly confirmed that all 3 victims were deceased long before the explosion, as medical examiners found no soot in their lungs and determined their fatal injuries were inflicted hours earlier. Police launched a statewide dragnet. On April 20, officers discovered Mary's abandoned Toyota 4Runner deep in the Payson wilderness, an area Fisher knew intimately from hunting trips. Bloodhounds, tactical units, and infrared-equipped aircraft searched miles of dense forest and complex cave systems, but found no definitive trace of the fugitive. On June 29, 2002, the FBI officially named Robert William Fisher to its 10 most wanted fugitives list, offering a major reward for information leading to his capture. Federal prosecutors issued a felony arrest warrant charging him with 3 counts of first-degree murder and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. After nearly 20 years without a confirmed sighting, the FBI removed Fisher from the top 10 list in November 2021, noting that the passage of time meant he no longer met the public notoriety criteria required for the list. However, federal law enforcement emphasized that the arrest warrant remains active. Investigators suspect his background as a surgical technician and extensive outdoor survival skills may have enabled him to alter his physical appearance and assume a new identity. The case of Robert William Fisher stands as a chilling portrait of destructive pride and unyielding control. It demonstrates how an individual, driven by a fear of public failure, can choose to destroy those closest to him and vanish into the shadows rather than face accountability. Case 7. John List. On June 1, 1989, inside an accounting firm in Richmond, Virginia, federal agents approached an unassuming 63-year-old tax accountant named Robert Peter Clark. When investigators compared his fingerprints against old military records, they confirmed a match that ended one of the longest cold case manhunts in American history. Nearly 18 years earlier, inside a darkened Victorian mansion in New Jersey, police had uncovered 5 bodies left in sleeping bags, while sacred organ music echoed through empty rooms. Within 11 months of his arrest, a jury in Union County, New Jersey, convicted him on 5 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 5 consecutive life terms without parole, ensuring he would die in prison. To understand how he got here, we have to go back. Born in September 1925 in Bay City, Michigan, John Emil List grew up in a strict, deeply religious Lutheran home. He served in the United States Army during World War II before earning an accounting degree from the University of Michigan. In 1951, he married Helen Taylor and the couple had 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. In 1965, List moved his family into Breeze Knoll, an expansive 19-room mansion in Westfield, New Jersey, where his 84-year-old mother, Alma, also lived on the 3rd floor. To his community and church, List presented an image of rigid morality, professional success, and quiet dignity. He wore suits to mow the lawn and insisted on absolute order. Yet behind that meticulous public persona lived a man drowning in quiet desperation and profound insecurity. List measured his entire self-worth through financial standing and religious conformity. His personality was defined by extreme repression, obsessive rigidity, and an inability to adapt to failure. When faced with financial ruin, List lacked the emotional resilience to accept reality. Instead, he developed a twisted religious delusion. He convinced himself that if his family went bankrupt, they would lose their social standing, stray from their faith, and fall into sin. In his mind, ending their lives was an act of mercy that would guarantee their souls went directly to heaven. The escalation began in 1967, when List lost his high-paying position at a Jersey City bank. Terrified of public shame, he kept the job loss a total secret from his family. Every morning for years, he dressed in a suit, grabbed his briefcase, and left home, spending his days sitting at local train stations. To pay the mortgage and maintain the illusion of wealth, he secretly siphoned money directly from his mother's bank accounts. By late 1971, the money was gone, foreclosures were imminent, and his secret life was about to collapse. On the morning of November 9, 1971, List put his plan into motion using 2 handguns, a 9mm automatic pistol and a .22 caliber revolver. After the children left for school, he shot 45-year-old Helen in the kitchen while she drank coffee. He then walked up to the 3rd floor and shot his mother Alma in her bed. When 16-year-old Patricia returned home, he shot her in the hallway. When 13-year-old Frederick arrived, List ended his life near the kitchen. List then drove to his eldest son's high school to watch 15-year-old John Jr. play in a soccer game. After driving the teenager home, a struggle ensued in the kitchen before List ended his son's life as well. List dragged the bodies of his wife and 3 children into the grand ballroom, placing them neatly on sleeping bags. He left his mother's body in her 3rd-floor apartment because it was too heavy to move. He remained in the house for nearly 2 days among the dead, systematically searching the mansion to cut his face out of every family photograph to prevent police from obtaining a recent picture. He wrote a 5-page confession letter addressed to his pastor, turned the thermostat low, set a radio station to play sacred organ music 24/7, locked the doors, and walked away on November 11. Because List had pre-notified the children's schools and his church that the family was taking an extended vacation, weeks passed before neighbors noticed lights left on continuously. Police finally entered the mansion 4 weeks later on December 7. List fled to Colorado, assumed the alias Robert Peter Clark, and built a new life as an accountant. He joined a local church and married his second wife, Dolores Miller, in 1985, keeping her completely ignorant of his past. The breakthrough came on May 21, 1989, when the television program America's Most Wanted broadcast a segment on the case. The episode featured an age-progressed clay bust created by forensic sculptor Frank Bender, who correctly predicted List's facial aging, hairline, and preference for thick horn-rimmed glasses. A viewer in Denver recognized her former neighbor Bob Clark and called the tip line, leading FBI agents to his doorstep in Virginia. During his April 1990 trial, prosecutors used List's own confession letter to dismantle his defense of mental illness, proving cold premeditation. The court sentenced him to 5 consecutive life sentences. John List died in custody on March 21, 2008, at age 82. The case of John List remains a haunting examination of extreme repression and toxic pride. It shows how an individual, consumed by an obsession with appearance and distorted piety, can commit catastrophic acts simply to avoid the embarrassment of honest failure. Case 8. David Bain. On June 5, 2009, inside the High Court at Christchurch, New Zealand, a jury returned a verdict of not guilty on 5 counts of murder. The announcement concluded a 15-year legal ordeal that divided an entire nation. The defendant, 37-year-old David Bain, walked out of the courtroom a free man, having already served 12 years in maximum security prison for a crime the justice system ultimately decided could not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The legal journey represented the only time in modern New Zealand history that an individual served over a decade behind bars for a mass homicide before receiving a complete acquittal in a full retrial. To understand how he got here, we have to go back. Born in February 1972 in Dunedin, New Zealand, David Bain grew up as the eldest son of Robin Bain, a school principal, and Margaret Bain. The family included 3 younger children, Arawa, Laniet, and Stephen. To neighbors and parish members, the Bains appeared to be an eccentric, deeply religious family residing in an overgrown house at 65 Every Street. Yet behind that public exterior lived a household fractured by severe dysfunction, financial strain, and personal estrangement. Robin and Margaret no longer shared a bed. Robin slept outside in a small caravan parked on the property. The home environment deteriorated into physical clutter and emotional isolation. Behind closed doors, secret rivalries and intense household pressures simmered, creating an environment fraught with silent resentment. The personality dynamics inside the home were complex and strained. While David was viewed by acquaintances as a quiet, polite music student who worked an early morning paper route, internal domestic friction reached a breaking point by mid-1994. Allegations later emerged during court proceedings regarding severe family dysfunction, mounting financial troubles, and deep personal conflicts between family members. The atmosphere inside 65 Every Street had become a pressure cooker. The tragedy unfolded on the morning of June 20, 1994. Between 5 and 6 in the morning, an assailant used a semi-automatic .22 caliber target rifle fitted with a silencer to shoot 5 members of the household: 50-year-old Margaret, 19-year-old Arawa, 18-year-old Laniet, 14-year-old Stephen, and 58-year-old Robin. David claimed he left the home at 5:45 a.m. to complete his daily paper delivery route, returning at 6:45 a.m. to find his family deceased. At 6:44 a.m., he placed a frantic emergency call to police dispatch, screaming into the receiver that his entire family was dead. Police officers arriving at the residence uncovered a complex crime scene. 14-year-old Stephen showed evidence of a significant physical struggle, while Robin lay dead in the living room with a single gunshot wound to the temple. Investigators immediately developed 2 competing theories. Either Robin Bain snapped under domestic strain and carried out a murder-suicide, or David systematically executed his family before or after his morning paper route. Within 4 days, police arrested David Bain. Detectives built their case on key forensic details. A plastic lens matching David's broken spectacle frames was recovered from Stephen's bedroom where the fight occurred. Minor bloodstains were found on David's clothing, and a typed message remained open on the family computer screen reading, "Sorry, you are the only one who deserved to stay." Prosecutors argued David typed the message before calling police, while the defense maintained Robin typed it prior to ending his own life. At his initial trial in 1995, prosecutors argued David killed his family for inheritance money and a fresh start. The jury convicted David on all 5 counts, and the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment with a 16-year non-parole period. However, a dedicated team of supporters led by former rugby star Joe Karam spent over a decade fighting the conviction. They uncovered evidence suppression, timeline inconsistencies, and police handling errors. In March 2007, the Privy Council in London quashed David's convictions, ruling that a substantial miscarriage of justice had occurred and ordered a full retrial. At the 2009 retrial in Christchurch, defense experts presented crucial forensic testimony. Pathology and ballistics analysis demonstrated that Robin Bain's gunshot wound, blood spatter patterns, and physical position were fully consistent with suicide. The defense also highlighted cross-contamination of evidence by initial investigating officers in 1994. After deliberating, the jury returned verdicts of not guilty on all counts. In 2016, the New Zealand government agreed to an ex gratia payment of $925,000 to cover legal expenses and end all judicial proceedings. The case of David Bain remains one of the most controversial forensic mysteries in modern jurisprudence. It underscores the immense challenge of forensic reconstruction within fractured households, demonstrating how physical evidence and timeline anomalies can leave a case disputed for decades. Case 9, Stephen Suppel. On the morning of March 24, 2008, emergency dispatchers in Johnson County, Iowa, received a brief phone call from a local resident. The caller directed law enforcement to a home on Prairie du Chien Road, stating that everyone inside was dead. Minutes later, before emergency units could reach the address, a minivan traveling at high speed collided directly with a heavy concrete bridge abutment on Interstate 80, instantly erupting into flames. When officers arrived at the suburban residence, they confirmed the tragic reality behind the call, securing a crime scene that brought a swift, devastating end to an ongoing federal investigation. To understand how he got here, we have to go back. Born and raised in Iowa City, Stephen Suppel grew up in a prominent, well-respected local family. He attended the University of Iowa, earned a finance degree, and built a successful banking career. Eventually, he rose to become the vice president and chief financial officer of Hills Bank and Trust Company. He married his wife Cheryl, and together they raised 4 children: Ethan, Seth, Bridget, and Eleanor. To neighbors, church members, and business associates, Suppel appeared to be a pillar of his community, an accomplished executive, a devoted father, and an active civic leader. Yet behind that polished image lived a man defined by overwhelming vanity, fragile pride, and a compulsive need to maintain an illusion of material success. Suppel relied heavily on social status to define his self-worth. When personal investments began to fail, he lacked the moral grounding to accept loss or step back from a lifestyle he could no longer afford. His personality was marked by deep-seated narcissism and an inability to face public failure. Suppel convinced himself that public disgrace was a fate worse than death. Instead of accepting responsibility for his financial choices, his thinking warped into a dangerous logic. He viewed his family as an extension of himself, concluding that ending their lives was preferable to leaving them behind to face the fallout of his downfall. The quiet escalation began 7 years earlier. Driven by a desire to cover failed personal investments, Suppel began systematically embezzling funds directly from Hills Bank and Trust Company. Over 7 years, he stole approximately $560,000, altering records to conceal the missing capital. In February 2008, internal bank auditors uncovered the discrepancies. The bank terminated his employment immediately. On February 28, 2008, a federal grand jury indicted Suppel on charges of embezzlement and money laundering, exposing him to a potential 30-year prison sentence, massive financial restitution, and public disgrace. Released on bond while awaiting trial, Suppel entered a rapid psychological spiral, viewing his impending legal proceedings as an intolerable destruction of his identity. Between the late evening of March 23 and the early morning hours of March 24, 2008, Suppel executed his plan inside the family home. He took the life of 42-year-old Cheryl, then moved through the house to end the lives of his 4 children, 10-year-old Ethan, 9-year-old Seth, 5-year-old Bridget, and 3-year-old Eleanor. Following the acts, Suppel attempted to ignite propane tanks inside the garage to destroy the home. When that failed, he gathered personal items, placed handwritten confession letters on the kitchen counter, and recorded voicemail messages for family members taking full responsibility. In those messages, he expressed a distorted rationale, stating he carried out the act out of a desire to keep the family together and shield them from the shame of his federal trial. At 6:31 a.m., Suppel called 911 from his mobile phone, directing law enforcement officers to his residence on Prairie du Chien Road before hanging up. He then entered his minivan and drove onto Interstate 80 in Johnson County. Steering the vehicle at speeds exceeding 90 miles per hour, he drove directly into a massive concrete bridge support. The impact killed him instantly, destroying the vehicle. Emergency responders arriving at the Prairie du Chien Road residence confirmed that Cheryl and the 4 children were deceased inside. The case of Stephen Suppel stands as a stark examination of the destructive power of unbridled ego and pride. It illustrates how an individual, consumed by a fear of public exposure and legal accountability, can choose total destruction over facing the consequences of his own choices. Case 10, Guy Heinze Jr. On August 29, 2009, inside the New Hope Mobile Home Park near Brunswick, Georgia, a frantic caller dialed 911. The 22-year-old caller reported returning home to discover his entire family severely injured inside their crowded mobile home. When deputies and emergency medical personnel entered the 900-square-foot structure, they uncovered one of the deadliest crime scenes in modern Georgia history. Within 4 years of the attack, a Glynn County jury convicted the caller on 8 counts of malice murder. To avoid a potential sentence of death, defense attorneys and prosecutors reached an agreement, resulting in 8 consecutive terms of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. To understand how he got here, we have to go back. Born in 1987 in Georgia, Guy Heinze Jr. grew up in a volatile environment marked by instability and hardship. He worked sporadic odd jobs, struggled with chronic substance abuse, and lived off and on inside an overcrowded trailer alongside family members and longtime friends. The residents included his father, Guy Heinze Sr., as well as members of the extended Toller family. To those in the surrounding trailer park, the household was known for persistent noise, chaos, and frequent domestic disputes. Yet beneath the daily disorder lay a deeper cycle of desperation, addiction, and personal conflict. Heinze Jr. developed a personality marked by volatile aggression, poor impulse control, and intense hostility when confronted. His behavior was heavily shaped by active drug dependency, specifically involving prescription painkillers and crack cocaine. Rather than addressing conflict constructively, Heinze Jr. reacted with hostility whenever his access to cash or narcotics was threatened. The cramped living quarters amplified these tensions, turning routine disagreements into dangerous confrontations. The escalation peaked during late August 2009. The household experienced sharp disputes over missing prescription hydrocodone pills and stolen money. Witnesses later reported that in the days leading up to the incident, Heinze Jr. engaged in repeated heated arguments with family members, demanding access to missing drugs and accusing others inside the trailer of keeping them from him. During the overnight hours of August 28 into August 29, 2009, an assailant launched a violent assault inside the mobile home. Armed with a heavy blunt object, determined by forensic examiners to be the solid barrel of a shotgun, the attacker moved through the narrow rooms, striking sleeping residents. The assault took the lives of 45-year-old Guy Heinze Sr., 44-year-old Rusty Toller Sr., 44-year-old Shirley Toller, 20-year-old Russell Toller Jr., 22-year-old Chrissy Toller, 15-year-old Michelle Toller, and 18-year-old Joseph Coleman. 19-year-old Michael Toller, who lived with Down syndrome, suffered critical injuries and succumbed to his wounds in the hospital the following day, bringing the total loss of life to 8. 3-year-old Byron Toller suffered severe injuries, but survived following intensive medical care. Following his frantic emergency call on the morning of August 29, police began questioning Heinze Jr. Detectives immediately noted significant physical inconsistencies. While the crime scene showed evidence of extreme blunt force impact, Heinze Jr. displayed no visible defensive wounds, bruises, or signs of physical struggle on his person. However, forensic technicians detected trace amounts of victim DNA on his clothing. Furthermore, officers recovered crack cocaine and stolen prescription pills in his possession, and search teams located a shotgun nearby whose barrel geometry matched the trauma patterns documented by medical examiners. Law enforcement arrested Heinze Jr. later that day, initially charging him with drug possession and obstruction, before a grand jury indicted him on 8 counts of malice murder in September 2009. During his October 2013 trial in Glynn County, defense attorneys argued that it was physically impossible for a single individual to disable 9 people in a cramped space without sustaining injuries, suggesting multiple attackers were involved. Prosecutors countered by presenting detailed forensic reconstructions, demonstrating how an armed individual could systematically disable victims who were asleep or impaired before they could react. On October 25, 2013, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 8 counts of malice murder. On October 31, the judge sentenced Guy Heinze Jr. to 8 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would spend the remainder of his life inside a Georgia maximum security prison. The case of Guy Heinze Jr. remains a grim study in the destructive intersection of severe addiction, volatility, and close-quarters conflict. It demonstrates how unaddressed hostility, fueled by substance abuse and intense personal friction, can erase an entire household in a matter of moments. Case 1. Lori Vallow Daybell. On June 9, 2020, federal agents and local law enforcement officers executed a search warrant on a property in Salem, Idaho. Heavy machinery cut into the soil near a backyard pet cemetery. Investigators uncovered the concealed remains of 7-year-old Joshua J.J. Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. Within hours, authorities placed self-published apocalyptic author Chad Daybell under arrest as he watched the excavation from his parked truck. His new wife, Lori Vallow Daybell, was already sitting in an Idaho jail cell on a $5 million bond. The discovery ended a 9-month multi-state search and exposed a calculated series of crimes involving financial fraud, religious delusion, and family betrayal. The legal process culminated in 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for Lori Vallow Daybell, followed by additional life terms in Arizona and a death sentence for Chad Daybell. To understand how a suburban mother transformed into a convicted killer, we have to look back at the origins of her life long before the police arrived in Idaho. Lori Norn Cox was born in San Bernardino, California in 1973, growing up in a close-knit, highly religious family structure. She moved frequently throughout her youth and early adulthood, spending years in Texas, Hawaii, and Arizona. She married her high school sweetheart, then a second husband with whom she had her eldest son, Colby Ryan. In 2001, she married her third husband, Joseph Ryan, giving birth to her daughter, Tylee. After that marriage dissolved in a bitter custody dispute, she married her fourth husband, Charles Vallow, a successful businessman, in 2006. In 2014, the couple adopted Charles's grandnephew, JJ, who had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. To her community, Lori appeared outwardly devoted, attractive, and charismatic. She managed JJ's complex daily therapy schedules and integrated herself into social and religious circles in Arizona. Beneath her polished appearance, however, she harbored a deep need for spiritual validation and social standing. People who knew her described a woman who craved attention, viewed herself as uniquely spiritually gifted, and harbored a growing obsession with grand, apocalyptic prophecies. Her ambition was not measured in corporate success, but in spiritual superiority. As the years passed, her conventional suburban life began to feel insufficient for her escalating ego. She began seeking out fringe religious groups and podcasts, eventually traveling to a conference in Salt Lake City, Utah, in October 2018. There, Lori encountered Chad Daybell, a former cemetery sexton and self-published writer who claimed to receive direct revelations from angels. Chad provided Lori with the exact spiritual validation she desired, telling her that they had been married in past lives and were chosen as divine leaders to gather 144,000 holy people for an impending apocalypse scheduled for July 2020. Their dynamic quickly evolved from a secret emotional affair into a shared belief system. They established a doctrine that categorized people as spiritually light or dark. Those deemed dark were eventually classified as zombies, individuals whose souls had allegedly been displaced by evil spirits. According to their shared dogma, the physical body of a zombie had to be destroyed for the original soul to enter heaven. Conveniently, everyone categorized as a zombie happened to be a spouse, family member, or child who stood in the way of their relationship or life insurance payouts. The ethical compromises began with secretive phone calls and financial manipulation, before quickly escalating into direct threats. In early 2019, Lori's husband, Charles Vallow, discovered their affair and Lori's radicalized beliefs. Charles sought help from Gilbert police, warning officers that Lori had threatened to kill him and claimed to be a translated being. He filed for divorce and removed her as the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy, replacing her with his sister, Kay Woodcock. The downward spiral reached a point of no return on July 11, 2019. Charles arrived at Lori's home in Chandler, Arizona, to pick up JJ for school. An argument ensued and Lori's brother, Alex Cox, who acted as her devoted enforcer, shot Charles to death inside the home. Alex claimed self-defense, and Chandler police initially accepted the narrative, allowing Lori to go out for smoothies with the children while her husband's body lay inside the house. Unaware that Charles had changed his insurance beneficiary, Lori attempted to claim the payout. When she learned the money was gone, the escalation intensified. She abruptly removed JJ from his specialized school, stopped providing his autism medication, and relocated Tylee, JJ, and Alex to an apartment complex in Rexburg, Idaho, just minutes from Chad Daybell's home. Tylee Ryan was last seen alive on September 8, 2019, during a family trip to Yellowstone National Park. Within hours, Alex Cox's cell phone pinged in Chad Daybell's backyard, followed by a text message from Chad to his wife, Tammy, claiming he had shot a raccoon and burned it in the yard pit. 2 weeks later, on September 22, JJ Vallow disappeared after being placed in his room by Alex Cox. The crimes were concealed through continuous deception and systemic exploitation. Lori logged into government portals every month to collect and deposit over $4,000 in Social Security benefits intended for her deceased children. When friends asked where the children were, she claimed Tylee was attending college and JJ was being homeschooled. The investigation gathered momentum in November 2019, when JJ's grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock, persuaded Rexburg police to conduct a welfare check. Lori lied to officers, claiming JJ was in Arizona with a friend named Melanie Gibb. When police asked Gibb to confirm the story, Gibb refused to lie, instead recording a phone call with Lori and Chad where they urged her to cover for them. The turning point came through digital forensics and physical evidence. Cyber investigators recovered thousands of text messages discussing spiritual ratings and logistics. Forensic analysts mapped Alex Cox's cell phone pings from September 2019 directly to the precise coordinates on Chad's farm where the children were buried. When Tammy Daybell died suddenly in October 2019, officers exhumed her body, and a medical examiner determined her cause of death was homicide by asphyxiation. Lori and Chad fled to Kauai, Hawaii, marrying on a beach 2 weeks after Tammy's death. But their evasion was short-lived. Lori was arrested in Hawaii in February 2020 for child desertion, and the physical recovery of the children's remains 4 months later locked the case into place. During Lori's trial in Boise, Idaho, prosecutors presented DNA evidence, including a strand of Lori's hair on the duct tape used to bind JJ. The jury convicted her on all counts. Subsequent trials in Arizona added further convictions for her role in the murders of Charles Vallow and the attempted murder of her nephew-in-law, Brandon Boudreaux. Lori Vallow Daybell remains incarcerated for life, a tragic study in how extreme narcissism, religious extremism, and personal greed can dismantle the most fundamental human obligation, the duty of a mother to protect her children. Case 2, Darlie Routier. On June 18, 1996, 12 days after two young brothers were brutally murdered inside their suburban home in Rolette, Texas, police officers executed an arrest warrant for capital murder. The suspect was not a roaming intruder or a predatory stranger. It was the children's mother, 26-year-old Darlie Routier. Her arrest brought an abrupt end to an intruder narrative that had gripped the affluent Dallas suburb. The legal proceedings culminated in a conviction for capital murder and a sentence of death by lethal injection. Today, Darlie Routier remains on death row at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas. To understand how a seemingly devoted mother ended up condemned to die, we must look back at the extravagant life she built before everything collapsed. Darlie Lynn Peck was born in Pennsylvania in 1970, eventually relocating to Texas as a teenager. There, she met Darren Routier, an ambitious young entrepreneur. The couple married and built a successful circuit board testing business in the early 1990s. As their wealth grew, so did their family with the birth of 3 sons, Devin, Damon, and Drake. By the mid-1990s, the Routiers represented the picture of suburban success. They resided in a sprawling 2-story custom home featuring an in-ground pool, expensive furniture, and high-end decor. Darlie drove a luxury sports car, frequented upscale salons, and spent freely on clothes, jewelry, and family vacations. Her identity was tied to material wealth and the image of domestic perfection. Her ambition was defined by status, glamour, and the appearance of effortless financial success. To her neighbors and friends, she was a vibrant, glamorous young mother who took immense pride in her family's affluent lifestyle. Beneath the polished facade, however, severe pressure was building. By mid-1996, the family's financial foundation had completely unraveled. Business revenues plummeted, credit card accounts were maxed to their limits, and back taxes began accumulating. Just days before the crime, a critical $5,000 bank loan application was officially rejected. Compounding this severe financial strain, Darlie was struggling with postpartum depression following the birth of her youngest son, Drake. The trajectory shifted drastically in the early morning hours of June 6, 1996. Darlie decided to sleep downstairs in the family room with 6-year-old Devin and 5-year-old Damon, while her husband slept upstairs with their infant. Shortly before 2:30 a.m., a frantic 911 call placed by Darlie reported that an intruder had broken into the house, stabbed her 2 sons, slashed her throat, and fled through the garage. When emergency responders arrived, they found a scene of severe violence. Both young boys had suffered fatal plunge wounds with a butcher knife taken directly from the home's kitchen block. Darlie had sustained a slash wound across her throat and minor surface injuries on her arm. She told detectives a dark-clothed man had attacked her and her children before escaping through the garage window. The police investigation began immediately, but crime scene technicians quickly encountered inconsistencies that contradicted her narrative. The garage window screen had been cut from the inside rather than the outside, and microscopic glass fibers from the screen were recovered from the kitchen butcher knife. Furthermore, dust on the garage window sill and surrounding spider webs were completely undisturbed, proving no intruder had climbed through the opening. The physical evidence unraveled her story step by step. Bloodstain pattern analysis revealed Darlie's blood beneath the kitchen sink and on top of a vacuum cleaner, proving she had moved around the kitchen staging the scene before calling emergency services. Medical examiners testified that while the wounds inflicted on the children were deep and delivered with extreme force, Darlie's throat injury was uniform in depth, stopping mere millimeters from her carotid artery, exhibiting the classic traits of a self-inflicted hesitation wound. Public suspicion intensified 8 days after the murders when local news cameras captured footage of Darlie and her family visiting the boys' gravesite. The broadcast showed Darlie smiling, singing, and spraying silly string over the graves to celebrate Devon's birthday. A stark behavioral anomaly that horrified the community and reinforced law enforcement's conclusions. During the trial in early 1997, prosecutors presented a clear case of financial desperation and scene staging. The defense argued an unknown intruder had escaped without leaving trace evidence, but the physical blood spatter and forensic screen analysis proved decisive. On February 1, 1997, the jury returned a guilty verdict for capital murder. Darlie Routier remains incarcerated on Texas's death row, her continuous appeals upholding a conviction rooted in immutable physical evidence. A stark case study in how severe financial pressure and personal crisis can shatter the illusion of a picture-perfect life. Case 3, Deborah Green. On November 22, 1995, law enforcement officers arrested 44-year-old physician Dr. Deborah Green outside a Kansas City hotel. She was charged with capital murder, attempted capital murder, and aggravated arson. The arrest shocked the wealthy community of Prairie Village, Kansas, exposing a calculated plot involving biological toxin harvesting and a fatal house fire. The legal proceedings culminated in a plea agreement where Deborah Green pleaded no contest to 2 counts of capital murder, 1 count of attempted capital murder, and 1 count of aggravated arson. On May 30, 1996, a Kansas judge sentenced her to 2 concurrent life prison terms with a mandatory 40-year minimum before parole eligibility. She remains incarcerated at the Topeka Correctional Facility. To understand how a brilliant physician turned to murder, we must examine the hidden fractures within her life and marriage. Deborah Jones was born in Illinois in 1951, excelling academically from an early age and graduating at the top of her class. She earned her medical degree and established herself as a practicing oncologist. In 1979, she married Dr. Michael Fura, a successful cardiologist. The couple eventually settled into a multi-million-dollar mansion in Prairie Village, raising 3 children, Timothy, Kate, and Kelly. To her neighbors, Deborah appeared to be an accomplished medical professional who had chosen to step back from practice to raise her children in comfort. She possessed sharp intellect and intense personal control. Her ambition was defined by academic perfection, professional status, and domestic dominance. Behind the affluent facade, however, severe personal instability was taking root. Deborah struggled with severe alcohol dependency, depression, and volatile mood shifts. As her personal issues intensified, her marriage deteriorated into frequent, bitter disputes. By mid-1995, Michael Fura informed Deborah that he was filing for divorce. Unwilling to relinquish her lavish lifestyle, split marital assets, or share custody of her children, Deborah's behavior shifted from resentment to covert violence. In August 1995, Michael developed a mysterious, life-threatening illness marked by severe gastrointestinal distress and rapid organ failure. Doctors were baffled by his recurring hospitalizations, unaware that Deborah was harvesting ricin from castor bean seeds purchased at a local nursery, and secretly grinding the toxin into his daily coffee. When Michael survived the poisoning, the escalation moved from covert poison to open destruction. On the night of October 24, 1995, while Michael was recovering elsewhere, Deborah poured pour patterns of gasoline across the main floor of their hardwood-paneled mansion and set the house ablaze. 13-year-old Timothy and 6-year-old Kelly perished in the flames from smoke inhalation and thermal burns, while 10-year-old Kate managed to escape onto a second-story roof. Deborah stood on the front lawn in her nightgown, calmly watching firefighters battle the inferno. She claimed she was asleep and barely escaped, but fire investigators noted immediately that her clothes and face bore zero soot or smoke residue, contradicting her story of escaping a house filled with heavy smoke. The investigation brought together the Prairie Village Police Department, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, and Federal Medical Laboratories. Accelerant detection K9 units alerted on distinct pour patterns on the floorboards, and chemical tests confirmed gasoline on carpet fibers and on Deborah's nightgown. Simultaneously, federal medical laboratories analyzed blood and tissue samples taken from Michael Fura during his hospital stays, discovering trace biomarkers of ricin poisoning. Investigators executed a search warrant on Deborah's temporary apartment, discovering packets of castor beans, a food processor with seed residue, and a medical journal detailing the lethal dosages of ricin. Confronted with undeniable physical and toxicological evidence, Deborah entered a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. On April 30, 1996, she entered no contest pleas to all charges, admitting her legal responsibility without contesting the state's evidence. Deborah Green remains behind bars in Kansas, her life serving as a chilling reminder of how pride, obsession, and the refusal to accept personal loss can destroy everything in its path. Case 4, Jalissa Toller. On the morning of May 20, 2022, police officers in Mound, Minnesota, initiated a traffic stop on a silver sedan driving on a bare tire rim with a shattered rear window. The driver, 28-year-old Jalissa Toller, stepped out of the vehicle with visible blood on her hands, face, and clothing. When officers opened the vehicle's trunk, they discovered the body of her 6-year-old son, Eli Hart, wrapped in a blanket alongside a shotgun. The immediate arrest ended a months-long legal custody battle and exposed a profound failure in child welfare oversight. The trial concluded in February 2023 when a jury convicted Jalissa Toller of first-degree premeditated murder, resulting in a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She is currently serving her sentence at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Shakopee. To understand how this tragedy occurred, we must examine the systemic decisions and personal instability that preceded it. Jalissa Toller lived in Spring Park, Minnesota. Her early adult life was marked by severe personal volatility, long-term drug dependency, and frequent interactions with law enforcement. In 2016, she gave birth to her son, Eli. Despite her parental role, she struggled to maintain stable housing, steady employment, or consistent personal relationships. To those who observed her, she appeared increasingly erratic and defensive. Her personal ambition was defined by control and resentment toward authority rather than productive stability. She harbored intense animosity toward Child Protective Services, court-appointed evaluators, and Eli's biological father, Torrey Hart. The situation reached a critical turning point in late 2021 when Dakota County Social Services intervened, removing 6-year-old Eli from Toller's care and placing him into foster placement due to documented concerns regarding her living conditions and drug use. Eli's biological father, Torrey Hart, actively fought in family court for full physical custody, submitting records detailing Toller's erratic behavior and missed rehabilitation appointments. Despite these warnings from child advocates and the father's legal team, a county judge officially closed the welfare case in early May 2022, restoring full physical parental custody to Jalissa Toller. Outraged by the lengthy court battle and harboring intense resentment toward Eli's father, Toller purchased a shotgun and ammunition within days of regaining custody. The escalation turned fatal during the overnight hours of May 19 into May 20, 2022. Toller placed Eli inside her vehicle and drove to a secluded park area in Mound, Minnesota. She discharged the firearm into the vehicle up to 9 times before placing Eli's body into the trunk. In an effort to conceal her actions, Toller disposed of blood-soaked items, spent shell casings, and a booster seat into commercial dumpsters near local gas stations. She then attempted to drive away, despite one of her tires being completely shredded down to the wheel rim, a malfunction that immediately attracted the attention of patrolling Orono police officers. The subsequent investigation relied on undeniable digital and physical evidence. Detectives recovered spent shotgun shell casings from the gas station dumpsters that matched the weapon found in her trunk. Cyberforensics experts extracted mobile phone search history, showing Toller had queried terms regarding firearm operations and blood volume loss in children days before the crime. Furthermore, DNA testing confirmed the presence of Eli's blood on her clothing and inside the vehicle. During the trial in Huntsman County District Court in January 2023, prosecutors presented the physical trail to establish premeditation. The defense attempted to challenge the degree of intent, but the evidence of advanced firearm acquisition and digital searches proved conclusive. On February 8, 2023, after less than 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. On February 16, 2023, the judge sentenced Jalissa Toller to life in prison without parole. The case sparked widespread calls for reform within Minnesota's child protection and family court systems, highlighting the critical importance of prioritizing cumulative risk assessments over administrative reunification goals to ensure vulnerable children are protected. Case 5. Andrea Yates. On the morning of June 20, 2001, emergency dispatchers in Houston, Texas, received a quiet, mechanical phone call from 36-year-old Andrea Yates. She asked for police officers to be sent to her home, and then called her husband at work, telling him to return immediately. When officers stepped through the front door, they encountered a quiet home and a horrific crime scene. Andrea Yates had drowned all 5 of her children sequentially in the bathroom tub. Her immediate arrest initiated one of the most intense legal and psychiatric debates in American history. After an initial murder conviction was overturned on appeal, a second trial in 2006 concluded with a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity. Today, Andrea Yates remains committed to the Kerrville State Hospital in Texas, repeatedly waiving her rights to formal release reviews. To understand how a valedictorian and registered nurse descended into catastrophic violence, we must examine the medical and psychological breakdown that preceded that June morning. Andrea Kennedy was born in Houston, Texas, in 1964. She excelled academically, graduating as high school valedictorian and completing a nursing degree to work as a registered nurse at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. In 1993, she married Rusty Yates. The couple adopted an isolated lifestyle, living for several years inside a converted motor home and committing to having as many children as possible. To those around her, Andrea was quiet, selfless, and deeply devoted to her family. Her personal ambition was defined by perfectionism, duty, and spiritual obedience. Behind her gentle exterior, however, severe medical and psychiatric disorders were taking root. Following the births of her 4th and 5th children, Andrea developed documented postpartum depression, severe postpartum psychosis, and schizophrenia. Her mental state spiraled into severe catatonia and vivid psychotic delusions. Medical records show multiple psychiatric hospitalizations following suicide attempts. She experienced auditory hallucinations telling her she was an unfit mother, and that her children were doomed to eternal damnation. Despite explicit medical warnings from her treating psychiatrists that another pregnancy would trigger a catastrophic psychotic breakdown, the couple had a 5th child, Mary, in late 2000. Following her father's death in early 2001, Andrea's mental stability completely collapsed. Medical records show that in the weeks leading up to June 2001, she stopped eating, sat in catatonia for hours, and required continuous supervision. The tragedy occurred during a brief 1-hour window on June 20, 2001, after her husband left for work and before her mother-in-law arrived to assist her. Driven by a psychotic delusion, Andrea filled the master bathtub and drowned her 5 children, 7-year-old Noah, 5-year-old John, 3-year-old Paul, 2-year-old Luke, and 6-month-old Mary. During police interrogations and psychiatric evaluations, Andrea explained her delusional logic with terrifying composure. She believed Satan was inside her, and that the only way to save her children's innocent souls from eternal hell was to take their lives on earth, accepting state execution and eternal damnation for herself. The investigation involved the Houston Police Department, medical examiners, and leading psychiatric experts. The central legal dispute focused entirely on Texas's strict insanity standard under the Manhattan Rule, which required proving that, due to severe mental disease, the defendant did not know her conduct was wrong. During her first trial in 2002, prosecutors argued that calling emergency services proved she understood the legal wrongfulness of her actions. The jury rejected her insanity defense, convicting her of capital murder and sentencing her to life in prison. However, in 2005, the Texas First Court of Appeals overturned her conviction after revealing that the state's key expert witness, Dr. Park Yates, had given false testimony regarding a non-existent television episode about a mother drowning her children. During her 2006 retrial, extensive medical testimony detailing her severe catatonia, schizophrenia, and religious delusions persuaded the jury. On July 26, 2006, the court returned a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity, committing her to high-security psychiatric care. The Andrea Yates case served as a major catalyst for medical reform, leading directly to federal legislation surrounding postpartum depression research, and changing how the legal system evaluates severe postpartum psychosis across the nation. Case 6. Megan Huntsman. On April 12, 2014, a man cleaning out a cluttered garage in Pleasant Grove, Utah, cut open a small cardboard box wrapped in heavy electrical tape tucked behind garbage bags. Inside, he discovered the skeletal remains of an infant. When police officers executed a search warrant on the property, they uncovered 6 additional sealed boxes hidden throughout the garage storage containers. The home belonged to 39-year-old Megan Huntsman, who had spent a decade hiding pregnancies, executing her newborn infants immediately after birth, and storing their bodies alongside household junk. Her immediate arrest brought an end to a mysterious 10-year period of secret deliveries and concealment. The legal process concluded in early 2015, when Megan Huntsman pleaded guilty to 6 counts of murder. On April 20, 2015, a Utah state judge sentenced her to 6 consecutive prison terms of 5 years to life. The Utah Board of Pardons and Parole subsequently ruled that she will remain incarcerated for the remainder of her natural life. She is currently serving her sentence at the Utah State Prison in Gunnison. To understand how 6 infants could vanish into a suburban garage without raising alarm, we must examine the secretive life Huntsman maintained. Megan Huntsman grew up in Pleasant Grove, Utah, appearing to neighbors and relatives as an average, quiet mother raising her 3 living daughters alongside her longtime partner, Darren West. Beneath this ordinary exterior, however, she was struggling with a severe, long-term methamphetamine addiction. Between 1996 and 2006, while residing in the family home, Huntsman repeatedly became pregnant without seeking medical care or informing anyone in her life. To those around her, she seemed withdrawn, detached, and increasingly isolated. Her personal ambition was entirely replaced by the demands of her chemical dependency. Driven by drug addiction and a complete unwillingness to take on parental responsibilities, she made a deliberate choice to eliminate every child born during this 10-year window. Using heavy, oversized clothing and shifting physical weight, Huntsman successfully concealed pregnancy after pregnancy from her partner, her growing daughters, and her extended family. Between 1996 and 2006, she secretly gave birth to 7 infants inside her residence without medical assistance. Immediately following each birth, Huntsman strangled or suffocated the newborn. After ensuring the infant was dead, she wrapped the body in towels, shirts, or plastic bags, placed it inside a shoe box or cardboard container, sealed the box with electrical tape, and stacked it among storage containers inside the garage. One of the 7 infants was determined by medical examiners to have been stillborn, while 6 were born alive and subsequently killed. Huntsman relied on the dense clutter of the garage to conceal her actions for nearly 2 decades. Because her partner, Darren West, was serving a federal prison sentence for drug-related offenses from 2006 to 2014, the boxes remained completely undisturbed. Huntsman eventually moved out of the residence in 2011, leaving the sealed boxes behind in the garage, while her adult daughters and West's family continued living on the property. The discovery occurred on April 12, 2014, when Darren West returned to the home after his release from federal prison to clear out the garage clutter. Upon opening the first taped box, he discovered human remains and immediately contacted the Pleasant Grove Police Department. Detectives systematically processed the garage, cataloging 6 additional boxes. The investigation relied heavily on DNA profiling and forensic pathology breakthroughs. DNA testing conducted by crime laboratories confirmed that all 7 infants were full biological siblings, born to Megan Huntsman and Darren West. Thorough interrogations of Darren West verified that he had no knowledge of the pregnancies or the crimes. During police interrogations, Huntsman provided a full confession, admitting she strangled or suffocated 6 live-born infants because she was addicted to methamphetamine and did not want to care for them. To establish legal proof that the Bobbies were born alive, state forensic pathologists utilized lung tissue flotation tests and advanced microscopic bone analysis, proving 6 of the infants had taken breaths prior to being killed. Faced with undeniable forensic evidence, Huntsman entered a plea agreement in February 2015, pleading guilty to 6 counts of murder. Megan Huntsman remains behind bars in Utah, serving a sentence that ensures she will never leave prison, a stark case study in how deep addiction and extreme secretiveness can yield a long-running narrative of undetected crime. Case 7, Diane Downs. On the night of May 19, 1983, a blood-soaked red sedan pulled into the emergency room driveway of Mackenzie Willamette Hospital in Springfield, Oregon. The driver, 27-year-old Elizabeth Diane Downs, suffered a clean gunshot wound to her left forearm. Inside the vehicle lay her 3 young children, 7-year-old Cheryl, 8-year-old Christy, and 3-year-old Danny, all shot at point-blank range. Downs calmly told responding officers that a bushy-haired stranger had flagged her down on a deserted rural road, attempted to carjack her, and shot her family. Her dramatic story triggered a massive manhunt, but within months, physical crime scene evidence, ballistics testing, and survivor testimony shattered her narrative. The legal proceedings concluded in June 1984 with convictions for murder and attempted murder, resulting in a sentence of life imprisonment plus 50 years. Following a sensational prison escape years later, she was transferred out of state and remains incarcerated at the Valley State Prison in Chowchilla, California. To understand how a mother could turn a firearm on her own sleeping children, we must examine the obsessive relationship that motivated her actions. Elizabeth Diane Frederickson was born in Phoenix, Arizona in 1955. She married Steve Downs, with whom she had 3 children, Christy, Cheryl, and Stephen, known as Danny. Following a turbulent divorce, Downs relocated to Oregon to work as a surrogate mail carrier for the United States Postal Service. While living in Arizona prior to her move, she engaged in an intense affair with a married co-worker named Robert Knickerbocker. Although Downs became obsessively fixated on Knickerbocker, he made it explicitly clear that he had no intention of leaving his wife to help raise 3 young children. To those who encountered her, Downs appeared outgoing, confident, and intensely self-centered. Her personal ambition was defined by romantic obsession and a desperate need for personal fulfillment. She viewed her 3 young children not as family members to protect, but as financial and emotional obstacles standing directly between her and a permanent relationship with the man she obsessed over. The calculated plan unraveled on the evening of May 19, 1983. Downs loaded her sleeping children into her sedan and drove down Old Stagecoach Road, an isolated rural route outside Springfield, Oregon. Pulling to the side of the road, she drew a .22 caliber Ruger pistol and fired into her children at point-blank range. Cheryl was killed instantly by 2 shots to the chest. Christy suffered a severe chest wound that triggered a massive stroke, while 3-year-old Danny was struck in the spine, leaving him permanently paralyzed. Downs then fired a single, low-velocity round into her own left forearm, before driving toward the hospital at an intentionally slow speed, under 10 miles per hour, with her hazard lights flashing, to ensure her children bled to death before receiving medical intervention. The subsequent investigation led by the Oregon State Police and Lane County prosecutors dismantled her carjacking story using rigorous forensic science. Medical surgeons noted that her arm wound contained gunpowder residue consistent with a close-range, self-inflicted gunshot. Bloodstain pattern analysis proved all shots were fired from inside the driver's seat, not through an open window by an outside attacker. Furthermore, search warrants executed on her residence recovered unfired .22 caliber shell casings bearing identical extractor mark striations to the crime scene casings. Detectives also discovered detailed diary entries expressing her despair over Knickerbocker's rejection due to her children. The decisive breakthrough occurred as 8-year-old Christy Downs slowly regained her speech through intensive physical therapy. When interviewed by child investigators, Christy identified her mother as the shooter. During the trial in May 1984, Christy took the witness stand, pointed across the courtroom at Diane Downs, and testified that her mother was the person who shot them. On June 17, 1984, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. In 1987, Downs staged a sensational escape from the Oregon Women's Correctional Center, scaling an 18-foot fence. She was recaptured 10 days later at the home of a former inmate's husband, leading to her transfer to maximum security facilities in New Jersey and California. Diane Downs remains incarcerated in California, having been repeatedly denied parole. A chilling case study in how narcissistic obsession and calculated deception can destroy young lives. Case 8. China Arnold. On November 27, 2006, homicide detectives in Dayton, Ohio, arrested 26-year-old China Arnold, charging her with aggravated murder. The arrest followed a 15-month forensic investigation into the death of her 28-day-old infant daughter, Paris Tolley. Medical examiners had uncovered an unprecedented cause of death involving severe internal thermal radiation without external flame charring. Her arrest initiated a lengthy legal journey involving 3 separate trials due to procedural delays and witness shifts. The legal process culminated on May 20, 2011, when a jury convicted China Arnold of aggravated murder, resulting in a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She remains incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. To understand how an infant's life was destroyed, we must examine the personal volatility and domestic disputes that preceded the crime. China Arnold grew up in Dayton, Ohio. Her early adult life was defined by personal instability, severe alcohol abuse, and prior minor legal infractions. In July 2005, she gave birth to her daughter, Paris, while living with her boyfriend, Terrell Tolley. To those around her, Arnold appeared volatile, impulse-driven, and highly reactive under the influence of alcohol. Her personal ambition was defined by emotional possessiveness and an intense fear of abandonment. In the weeks following the infant's birth, intense arguments broke out between Arnold and Tolley regarding the child's biological paternity, with Tolley repeatedly questioning whether he was the biological father. The conflict reached a fatal point during the early morning hours of August 30, 2005. Following a heavy drinking binge that culminated in another heated confrontation with her boyfriend over paternity inside their Dayton apartment, Arnold took 28-day-old Paris into the kitchen while heavily intoxicated. She placed the infant into a high-wattage microwave oven, closed the door, and activated the appliance for a cycle lasting over 2 minutes. The high-frequency electromagnetic radiation heated the infant's internal organs and body fluids to extreme temperatures, causing catastrophic internal thermal destruction. Following the act, Arnold placed the infant back into her crib, pretending nothing had occurred. Later that afternoon, she brought the lifeless baby to Children's Medical Center in Dayton, claiming she had found the child cold and unresponsive in her bed. The subsequent investigation involved the Dayton Police Department, the Montgomery County Coroner's Office, and specialized forensic research pathologists. When medical personnel examined the infant, they observed that while her skin bore no external soot, charring, or chemical blistering typical of a house fire or boiling liquids, her internal core temperature exceeded 107 degrees Fahrenheit, causing total organ failure. Pathologists concluded that the only mechanism capable of destroying internal organ tissue while leaving the external skin largely intact, without smoke inhalation, was high-wattage microwave radiation. This medical breakthrough provided the objective proof needed to dismantle Arnold's changing stories, which had attempted to blame neighborhood rivals or outside babysitters. During her third trial in Montgomery County Common Pleas Court in May 2011, prosecutors introduced testimony from jail cellmates to whom Arnold had confessed, admitting she placed the baby into the microwave because she feared her boyfriend would leave her if he proved the child was not his. On May 13, 2011, the jury returned a guilty verdict for aggravated murder. China Arnold remains behind bars in Ohio, serving a sentence of life without parole, a case that stands as a stark forensic landmark in how physical science can prove truth in the face of extreme deception. Case 9. Amy Bishop. On February 12, 2010, law enforcement officers in Huntsville, Alabama, apprehended 44-year-old neurobiologist Dr. Amy Bishop outside the Shelby Center for Science and Technology at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Minutes earlier, during a routine biology department faculty meeting, Bishop had drawn a 9mm handgun and opened fire on her colleagues, killing 3 faculty members and critically wounding 3 others. Her arrest sent shockwaves through academia, but the national media scrutiny that followed unraveled an even darker secret. The campus shooting forced Massachusetts law enforcement to reopen a 24-year-old cold case, revealing that Bishop had previously shot and killed her biological brother in 1986, an incident originally covered up and dismissed as an accident due to local political influence. The legal proceedings concluded in September 2012, when Amy Bishop pleaded guilty to capital murder, receiving a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Today, she remains incarcerated at the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. To understand how an accomplished Harvard-educated scientist escalated to mass violence, we must examine the hidden privilege and violent instability that defined her early life. Amy Bishop grew up in Braintree, Massachusetts, in an affluent household. She was academically gifted, completing her undergraduate studies before earning a doctorate in genetics from Harvard University. In 2003, she was hired as an assistant professor of biology at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, living with her husband, James Anderson, and their 4 children. To outside observers, Bishop possessed an elite academic background and an impressive intellectual pedigree. Her identity was entirely defined by intellectual superiority, academic recognition, and professional status. Beneath her credentials, however, laid a long-documented history of intense volatility, severe paranoia, and violent outbursts whenever her professional competence or authority was challenged. The origin of her unchecked behavior dated back to December 6, 1986, when 21-year-old Amy Bishop loaded a 12-gauge shotgun inside her family's Braintree home and shot her 18-year-old brother, Seth Bishop, directly in the chest. Following the shooting, she fled the house with the loaded weapon, ran down the street, and held employees at a local auto dealership at gunpoint before being tackled by police officers. Despite the clear sequence of violent actions, no formal charges were pursued. At the time, Braintree's police chief maintained close personal ties to Bishop's mother, who served on the local police town council. The official investigation was abruptly halted, police records were locked away in a safe, and the death of Seth Bishop was ruled an accidental discharge. This political protection allowed a killer to walk free for over 2 decades and pursue an academic career without a criminal record. By 2009, her academic career hit a definitive roadblock. The tenure committee at the University of Alabama in Huntsville formally denied Bishop's application for permanent academic tenure, meaning her employment contract would expire at the end of the 2009-2010 academic year. Consumed by rage and financial panic, she filed formal appeals that were systematically rejected by university leadership. The trajectory reached a fatal point on February 12, 2010. Bishop attended a weekly biology department faculty meeting on the 3rd floor of the Shelby Center. She sat quietly at the conference table for 50 minutes. When the department chair moved to routine administrative topics, Bishop stood up, drew a 9mm Ruger semi-automatic handgun from her handbag, and fired methodically at her colleagues' heads at close range. Department Chair Dr. Gopi Padilla, Dr. Maria Ragland Davis, and Dr. Adriel Johnson were killed instantly. Dr. Luis Cruz Vieira, Dr. Joseph Leahy, and staff member Stephanie Montixiolo suffered severe, critical gunshot wounds. After firing 9 rounds, her handgun jammed. Surviving professors seized the moment to force Bishop out of the conference room and barricade the door. Bishop dropped the weapon in a restroom trash can and attempted to blend in with fleeing students before officers intercepted her outside the building. The mass shooting triggered intense investigative scrutiny by federal agents and investigative journalists into her past. Investigators uncovered the buried 1986 Massachusetts police files. In June 2010, a Norfolk County grand jury officially indicted Amy Bishop for first-degree murder for the 1986 death of her brother, concluding that the original investigation had been intentionally suppressed due to executive political pressure. Faced with overwhelming witness testimony from surviving professors, ballistics evidence, and the prospect of the death penalty in Alabama, Bishop abandoned her initial insanity defense. On September 11, 2012, she pleaded guilty to capital murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. On September 24, 2012, the judge sentenced her to life without parole. Massachusetts authorities chose not to extradite her, as her Alabama sentence guaranteed she would spend her natural life behind bars. The Amy Bishop case remains a chilling testament to how political favoritism and institutional failure can delay justice, allowing an unchecked history of violence to culminate in tragedy years later. Case 10, Sarah Hartsfield. On February 3, 2023, deputies from the Chambers County Sheriff's Office and agents with the Texas Rangers executed an arrest warrant at a residence in Beach City, Texas. They taken into custody 48-year-old Sarah Hartsfield, charging her with first-degree murder in the death of her 5th husband, 46-year-old Joseph Hartsfield. The arrest followed a weeks-long homicide investigation into a catastrophic medical emergency that hospital staff quickly flagged as highly unnatural. Her indictment made national headlines, but as investigators from multiple states began comparing case files, a far broader pattern emerged. Sarah Hartsfield was not merely a grieving widow facing a single charge. Behind her lay a 25-year trail of extreme domestic volatility, protective orders, suspicious shootings, and life insurance claims stretching across Texas, Minnesota, and Missouri. The legal process in Chambers County culminated in a trial where a jury found Sarah Hartsfield guilty of first-degree murder, resulting in a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She remains incarcerated within the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. To understand how a serial domestic perpetrator operated across state lines for decades without legal accountability, we must examine the history of calculated conflict that defined her life. Sarah George was born in Texas in 1974. Over 25 years, she cycled through 5 marriages and multiple engagements, changing her surname to Pittman, Donohue, and eventually Hartsfield. To those who met her casually, she presented an outgoing, articulate, and confident persona. She projected an image of self-sufficiency and domestic devotion. Behind her exterior, however, was a long-documented history of intense personal conflict and financial calculation. Her ambition was defined by control, financial security, and emotional dominance over her domestic partners. Whenever a relationship began to dissolve or financial pressure mounted, her response followed a predictable pattern of dramatic accusations, legal protective orders, and physical escalation. Her history of violent escalation gained law enforcement attention years before her arrest in Texas. In 2018, while living in Douglas County, Minnesota, Sarah was engaged to a 43-year-old man named David Bragg. On the morning of May 9, 2018, a shooting occurred inside their shared home, resulting in David Bragg's death from a gunshot wound to the chest. When local police arrived, Sarah claimed Bragg had violently assaulted her during an argument and that she had pulled a handgun and shot him in self-defense. Douglas County prosecutors evaluated her statement alongside the initial physical evidence and ultimately declined to file criminal charges, officially accepting her self-defense narrative. She subsequently collected on financial assets connected to the relationship and moved back to Texas. By late 2022, Sarah had met and married her 5th husband, Joseph Hartsfield, a 46-year-old business manager living in Beach City, Texas. Joseph was an insulin-dependent diabetic who utilized an automated continuous glucose monitor linked to a smart device to track his blood sugar levels. Within months of the wedding, significant life insurance policies were established, naming Sarah as the primary beneficiary. The trajectory reached a fatal point during the overnight hours of January 6 into January 7, 2023. While inside their Beach City home, Joseph suffered a severe medical collapse. Hospital records later established that Joseph's blood sugar levels had plummeted to fatal, non-survivable lows caused by massive, exogenous doses of insulin administered over several hours, an extreme overdose that bypassed his automated monitor's warning systems. Despite observing her husband's physical deterioration, Sarah withheld emergency medical calls for hours. When she finally dialed 911 on the morning of January 7, paramedics arrived to find Joseph completely unresponsive. He was rushed to a local hospital in Bain, Texas, where doctors determined he had suffered irreversible, catastrophic brain death due to prolonged severe hypoglycemia. While Joseph lay brain-dead in the intensive care unit, Sarah's behavior inside the hospital alarmed medical personnel and law enforcement officers. Police bodycam footage recorded her arguing calmly with medical staff over life insurance documentation, power of attorney rights, and demands to disconnect his life support systems before Joseph's extended family members could arrive at his bedside. Joseph Hartsfield died on January 15, 2023, when life support was officially withdrawn. The subsequent investigation led by Chambers County Sheriff's detectives and the Texas Rangers relied on digital forensics and medical device analysis. Cyberforensics experts executed search warrants on Sarah's mobile devices, uncovering search histories recorded prior to the emergency inquiring about lethal insulin dosages, the physiological timeline of insulin toxicity, and methods to bypass automated glucose alarms. Furthermore, text message extractions revealed that While her husband lay dying in the hospital bed beside her, Sarah was actively messaging other men on social media platforms to initiate new romantic relationships. The arrest in Texas triggered immediate action across state lines. Observing the forensic evidence of scene manipulation and medical device tampering in Texas, Minnesota law enforcement authorities officially reopened the 2018 homicide investigation into the shooting death of David Bragg, re-examining original ballistics, blood spatter evidence, and physical positioning for indicators of crime scene staging. During her trial in Chambers County, prosecutors presented a detailed, fact-driven case highlighting the digital search records, insulin toxicity timelines, financial insurance policies, and recorded hospital bodycam footage. The defense attempted to argue Joseph's death was a self-administered accidental overdose, but the forensic evidence showing deliberate device manipulation and delayed emergency reporting proved conclusive. The jury returned a verdict of guilty for first-degree murder, and the court sentenced Sarah Hartsfield to life in prison without parole. The Sarah Hartsfield case remains a stark case study in how domestic perpetrators can exploit legal self-defense claims and medical conditions to conceal a long-running narrative of criminal violence.